Welcome back to the channel, guys. We just unboxed a bunch of components for a new fly rod that I'm about to build for some Great Lakes steelhead fishing. I'm also doing a challenge video around that, and it involves a giveaway of a whole make your own fly rod kit. So if you don't want to miss that, that video will be coming up. Hit that subscribe button down below and the notification bell so you don't miss that. Now let's walk through the components that we just unboxed here, and then what we're going to do in today's video is show you entirely step-by-step process of how to build an entire fishing rod from start to finish. This is going to be for a fly rod and a little more advanced techniques. If you just want to learn how to build a fishing rod in general as a beginner, I'll have that video coming up this winter. So the rod that I got, this is the MHX Fly Blank, not the native series. And what I will do in the description below, I will put their link to their website and then the rod recipe. It'll have every part number that I used on this rod build. So if you want to build it exactly the same or just like a part that I used, you can get that down below. What I have here is that 10'7" weight. I went with the 10-footer over a 9-footer because it gives you a little extra length and better line management fishing on those streams up there. And the most important thing is getting a natural drift, not really what fly you're using sometimes. This little package right here, I'm not going to open it up because there's a bunch of little single pieces in here that I don't want to lose right now. This is the guide set. So I went with single foot guides. I thought they looked a little cleaner than the snake guides, and I just wanted to try some single footers, and I also didn't want to do double guide wraps on each guide. So we went with single footers and 2 double foot stripper guides, which we'll show you in a second. All chrome guide set. And then I went with a chrome winding check to go in front of the reel or the handle as well. And then a couple other things that we grabbed here. Full Wells cork grip handle. That's going to be our handle right there. It has the insert on the inside for our aluminum reel seat, and we'll show you this once we get out of the package a little bit later to build the rod. And the last piece we grabbed for our rod here is just a fighting butt rubberized cork on the bottom with a little bit of cork on top and a little bit of a flare to it. We grabbed some pink as well just in case, and we grabbed some olive green. I have a couple other greens and I have a couple other pinks. So we'll play around with some colors and see what looks best. Now that we talked about the materials that you need, essentially all you're going to need is your rod, some masking tape, some epoxy, some isopropyl alcohol for cleanup, some popsicle sticks, the pieces that we already talked about, some paper towels, a paper plate, regular household items, China marker right there. That's going to be very useful. We'll show you here in a second what we're going to do with that. And then the second thing you're going to need is reamers. You can see they come in different sizes, so they come in a set typically. I am going to use mine in a drill. You can see right there they'll attach into a drill. So that's why we have the drill here. It makes it a lot quicker. But they do come with a little handle like this, like a screwdriver, so you can just ream by hand as well. Before you even put anything on your rod is find the spine of your rod. If you've ever watched rod building videos before, I'm sure they've talked about it before. It's the most important part of rod building. A lot of rods you get in a store are not spined, so they do not have the benefits of being built on the spine of your rod. Essentially all that is like your own spine. So whenever you go to pick something up, it's easier to pick something up this way than it is to bend over backwards and pick it up this way or sideways, either way. Since this is a fly rod, we'll be putting our guides on the underside of the spine, so when the rod flexes, it'll be putting under load like that. Since this is a 4-piece rod, you would spine all 4, but I'm going to show you real fast how to spine a rod. It's very easy. This little flag right here is going to show you what I'm talking about. All you're going to do is apply pressure on a table or on a surface depending how big your rod is. So while you roll this in your hand, you can see we'll jump into position, and on a certain, you just want to keep applying pressure, and you can see right there, see how it jumps into that position? That is the spine right there where it'll kind of stick. Now this is where your China marker comes in handy. You would take your China marker and you just make a small mark on your rod blank. Just like that. I'll extend that mark a little bit. You can see it's a straight line. So now what we'll be able to do is not only line up our guides on the rod, but our handle and everything else. Everything's going to have to be aligned in the end. So these spine marks will all match up. So now that we're going to put our handle on the rod, we have just the butt section here. Since this is a multiple piece rod, it would make it easier to work with just in one piece. I have my rod stands here, which helps just kind of have a place to put my rod and do whatever I need. This sticker you can take off, but since we're doing a full handle that's going to end up covering this whole thing, I'm just going to leave it on there. The first thing that we're going to do to put our handle on is mark where everything is going to go on our rod. So the butt will go right there, and we'll just make a little mark on where that's going to go. It doesn't have to be perfect, just a general area. We know the butt's going to go right there. We will take our reel seat, which you can also see I have prepped. I wrapped all the threads with masking tape and moved the threads all the way as tight as they can go. This will make cleanup a lot easier at the very end. This inset goes on the other end, so I'll lay this right there. And you can see I'm marking it shorter than what the reel seat actually ends, because this goes inside your grip. So my grip is actually going to have to go to here, that reel seat to fit on the inside. And I'll just kind of roughly mark where my reel seat's going to go, about there. The reason you have to ream is this is not going to fit on there. They all come with a standard inner diameter. That's not going to fit on the end of this rod, so we're going to have to ream out the inside of that. The number one thing with reaming out the inserts on your cork, especially cork, take your time, go very slowly, start smaller than you think you need to go. So this one right here, that is pretty tight. I'm going to have to be very gentle going through with this one to make sure that I don't crack the cork out or anything. I even might do it a little bit by hand first just to make sure I don't. So I'm going to show you a little bit just how it works by hand, and then we'll throw it in the drill and go the rest of the way. Basically all you do is just slowly twist your reamer. You want to keep it as centered as possible, going all the way through, and you just slowly work it through the grip, and you'll ream forward a little bit and then come backwards, and that'll pull all that cork dust that you're freeing up back out so that it doesn't get all stuck on the reamer and create too much friction, and that's what'll crack your cork. And you want to make sure you clean that out after every time to make sure that you don't get any built up in there. So when you put your epoxy on, this will stick to your rod forever and never come off. Now we have it in the drill, it's going to make life a lot easier, it's going to go a lot faster. You still need to take your time, and you need to check multiple times on the rod, because if you over ream, you cannot use the cork grip anymore. You still could, you'd put some tape underneath and be able to find a way to make it work. You basically ruin the grip when you're done. This is a $20 grip, I don't want to ruin it, so I'm going to take my time. I'm going to ream a little bit and then put it on the rod, and then ream a little bit more and put it on the rod. Take my time going very slowly to make sure I don't crack the cork and to make sure it fits right where I marked on the rod. We got our cork grip all reamed out here. You can see when we put it on the rod, we have our mark on the rod, and we just want to slide it down, and you can see it starts to get snug right there on our mark. That's perfect. You want it snug, but you don't want to have to force it down. Once you get the epoxy on, it'll act as a lubricant and it'll slide into place. Then, since it's tight to the rod already, it'll get all epoxy in all the crevices, and it'll merge to the rod forever, and it'll never come off. So this is all you have to do to make a tape arbor. I just use simple masking tape. It's cheap and effective. All I'll do is I'll come right where my mark is here. I'll lay the tape on, and you just rotate the blank in a circle, and it'll build up a little ball of tape right there. And you just keep going. Say that's where you're going to stop, you think that's good, you'd snap off your masking tape, you'd slide your reel seat on. Once I get over it, we're still loose, so we got to keep adding tape. So now that we got our 3 tape arbors built up here, what you'll notice when you get this right, see how that, it's hard to tell, but the first one you can see it doesn't wiggle that much. When I put it over the second one, you can see it really doesn't wiggle. And once I get it over that third one there, you can see I literally can move the rod, nothing moves. I literally can, it's on there. So now once we put epoxy on there and encapsulate everything together, your reel seat will not come undone ever when you're fishing, along with your grip, which you have tight. The last thing that we need to do is ream out our butt cap to fit where we need it to fit. And the easiest way to do that, since there's no hole, you put your reamer in the front like this. You don't want to push because you can go through the bottom of the cork, but you'll run the reamer and spin it in a circle like this, and it'll slowly remove outer material. So we'll go ahead and do a little twisting motion. So that goes on there, it's pretty tight, that's right where we want it. And we have our winding check, which all that does is just clear up this edge here so it looks like you didn't ream anything, and just brings it all together. Alright, so it's starting to get dark here, so we're going to do this relatively quickly. Mixing up the epoxy. This is the pro paste stuff that we're going to be using. There's a part A, which is this blue stuff, and part B is the red stuff over here. All you have to do is just take a 50-50 mixture of each. Mix more than you think you need because you want to put as much of this on here as you can get. It'll all squeegee off whatever doesn't fit in the components, and then you can wipe it off when you're done, and it comes off pretty easily. So I'll grab a little mixture here. I just use a paper plate to put it on. So since I'm doing a full cork handle and everything like that, I'm going to get a pretty big glob of this stuff here. Do not put this popsicle stick in here, it'll harden up your epoxy. Grab another mixing stick and try and eyeball this. It doesn't have to be exact, but just, you don't want a big glob of one and a small little bit of the other. So I'll kind of eyeball. So that's about 50-50 for me. What I'll do, I'll cap the other one up so neither of these get dried out or anything like that. You can use the popsicle stick that you just used to mix these together because now you're mixing them and you want them to get hard. So I'll just blend all this together on the paper plate. Once it comes one color like that and it's kind of like a pale yellow, then you're good. Throw a little bit on the end here because we're going to put the butt cap on first. And like I said, if some of it gets anywhere, don't worry about it. It will come off in the end. We'll put our butt cap on like that. Now I can set this in my stand gently. I can get a little bit more. And this is where you're going to need a lot because you have to completely coat these tape arbors. So I'm going to get a real big amount here and really put it on there. Like, go overboard with this stuff. Don't worry about it. We'll show you how to get it off here in just a second. Now you can see these are completely covered. No empty spots, no air pockets, none of that. Take our reel seat. Make sure you have the inletted side up so that you can put it on your rod. And what I'll do is I'll rotate the rod like this and make sure that all that glue fills where it needs to go. And then just as it's about to finish there, I'll grab another popsicle stick. This is how you're going to keep it pretty clean. Angle it outward towards the tape and push the epoxy off, all that extra stuff. Try and push as much of it off as you can. You still want a little bit in there, but I'll kind of scrape at it and push that all the way down. So now you have a completed reel seat and everything like that. Now here's the key part. Make sure you look at your rod and line up your reel seat with your spine mark, like we talked about earlier. I know I already said you want a lot of this stuff, but I'm serious, like you cannot put too much of this stuff on. This is what's going to keep the handle on your rod. If you don't put enough on, or if you've ever had a rod where the handle comes off after a few years because the water's getting in there or something, it's because they don't use enough epoxy. You want to put as much on as you can. Again, I'll put it on there. I'll rotate the rod down so that all that glue gets inside there. You want to make sure you don't get any glue in the hole where your reel is going to go. So we're going to wipe that away first. You want to make sure that recess is all the way pushed up in there. A lot of times you'll get some air pockets in there while you're forcing this down, and what will happen is it'll start to push your reel seat back out or the cork back forward, and this inlet will start to come back out. So you just want to make sure that's good in there. So now we're good. The last piece we got to put on is our winding check. You just need a tiny dab. You put it right in the front here. Then I'll take a popsicle stick so that I don't get epoxy everywhere, and I'll just push it right into place there. So now we'll take some paper towels, and this is isopropyl alcohol. Put a little bit on the rag like that, but all I'll do is I'll rotate the rod around where the epoxy was and rub the isopropyl alcohol on that area, and then I'll flip it back over and go in with a dry side and kind of wipe off any of that epoxy that's still left on there, and that isopropyl alcohol has loosened up. And that is the technique for cleaning it up, and it gets it all nice and clean. It removes all the epoxy right off of there. So we're going to go through, remove the rest of the epoxy off of this, and then we're going to sit this somewhere. I'll probably lean it up against a wall like this in the corner, make sure it doesn't touch anything, make sure everything's straight. We'll leave it cure for 24 hours, and then we can move on to the next part. So now that we have the handle on, I test fitted the reel on here. I'm actually filming this after the fact. I have just finished the rod with the exception of the finish. I have the handle done here. I did a little bit of decorative work. Not sure how well that's gonna focus there, but I kind of did like a steelhead pattern because that's what I'm gonna be using this rod for. So silver, pink, and green there. But then the next thing that I did was I took my guide spacing manual and I spaced out all my guides on my rod. So I would mark with a China marker where each one of these guides would go. And then I attached them to the rod with either tape or a rubber band, laid them all out on the rod, and then we will show you how to wrap them here in just a second. Here is my thread wrapping station that we're going to go through before we start wrapping some guides. I have a spool tension device here. We're just going to be using one color. I use some of these other colors on the rest of the rod here. This just slides up and down this track system. And then I have the track system that goes right here to the actual rod wrapper itself. I do not have it plugged in. I'm going to show you how to hand wrap today. I'm not going to use the power wrapper because the kit that will be given away in a video coming up soon, so make sure you hit that subscribe button below, will have a hand wrapping kit in it. Now all we have to do is wrap our guides. I have the camera set up in first person view right here. I'm going to try and work around it the best I can, and we are going to show you how to wrap a guide. So the first thing that I do is I take my thread, which I've showed you here already how I have my thread carriage set up. I'll take my thread and I'll lay it as close to this guide foot as I can. And then I will take a couple wraps and bring it spiraled up the rod here. And I'll take a small piece of tape and just tape it down. So now my thread is not going anywhere, it's onto the rod. Now to get it to stay onto the rod without the tape, you just cross over the thread. You can touch it up with your thumbnail, and you just begin wrapping. And the hard part is going to be to make sure that it doesn't go over itself multiple times. You want it all in one single layer. And then this yellow tool right here, this is called a burnishing tool. What I'll do is I will take and touch up the threads. You can push them closer together and make sure they're packed in. And then we'll just continue our guide wrap up the rod. Once you get a few wraps on it, you can take this piece of tape off, and you can see now the thread stays on there even without the tape, so you're good. We'll keep wrapping up a little bit more here. We'll take our tag and trim it really close. Now that we have our tag end trimmed, I'll take one last look and try and touch up anything I think needs kind of packed together here. And once it looks good, now that you got it up the guide foot, you just wrap away. And I'll just slowly turn the rod with my hands here. Now I'm getting up close to where the guide foot is being held down with a piece of tape, rubber band, whatever you typically use. I'll take my razor blade and gently, without scratching the blank, cut that right off. Guide stays on there, and you just wrap away. What we do then is take what's called a pull through. So I have a piece of white thread here, which it'll focus better once I have it in the guide wrap here. This is thicker thread than what I'm using on the rod here. So I have size A thread. This is size D. I will put this in here. You can use braided line. You can use whatever you want. I'll put that underneath my thread like that, slide it up with the loop facing this way. That will allow us to pull our thread back through so it doesn't come unraveled. So we will wrap all the way up to the foot of the guide where it turns up into a guide. Now typically you would just finish your wrap like this. Since this is a single foot guide, what I do is a locking wrap. I'll bring it up, put my finger on there, wrap around the foot of the guide and come back down. And I'll do one more, come back down. Now you put your thumb on the thread to hold your tension because you're going to loosen that. Now you can see there's no tension, but it's not coming unwound. Cut just a little bit of the thread there so you have a tag, and drop it through the loop and pull it back towards you like you have it on your tensioner. You'll take this pull through and pull it up to its tight, pull it on through, and now you have a guide wrapped on. So now that's all that's left to do. I'll pull this up 90 degrees to the rod. I will lay my razor blade on the rod blank and pull the thread into it, and it'll pop right off just like that. Super clean guide wrap. You can see nice and smooth, no overlapping thread. And with that locking wrap, that guide will not come off, even though it's a single foot guide. It'll be locked in there once we put epoxy on. It will never come off. All right, so now that we have our guides wrapped on our rod, we have one last thing to do before we put some finish on it and then go fishing with it. You got to put the tip on the rod. So right here is the rod tip that we're going to be using. As you can see, it has a little hole, and this is the rod tip glue that we use. So all that I do, I prep the rod tip first before I go to put it on the rod. That way it makes it much easier. It's prepped. All I have to do is heat it up and slide it on and line it up with the guide. So all we do is take our razor blade and cut thin slices of this glue here, little shavings like this. So when I cut little slices of this rod tip glue, and it's going to be hard to see because these are literally microscopic that I'm cutting them into sizes, I'll slide them into the tip of the rod here. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll keep cutting slices off until I fill the rod tip up. You can see some of the glue is sticking out there. Now I have a full rod tip of glue. This is ready to go onto the rod. So now that we're at the tip of the rod here, all I did was line the rod up in the vertical position with the guides sticking up. So now all I will have to do is heat this rod tip and slide it on just like that, and it'll be perfectly lined up. All I'll take is a lighter, and I will begin to heat this glue, and it will start melting, and I'll try and hold it up vertical like this so that it melts the glue down into the rod tip. And I will keep heating it up, and usually my sign is it'll start to bubble out a little bit. Just like that, it's starting to bubble out. I'll come to the tip of the rod. I will put it on, slide it down to where it needs to be, and then I will line it up with the rest of the guides, and now we have our rod tip on. Okay, so now we're going to show you how to put finish on a guide wrap here so that you can take this rod fishing. I get these little mixing cups right here, and then I use Threadmaster Light Build thread finish for like lighter freshwater rods. If you're building a saltwater rod, you might want to go with the heavier stuff, but I just use Light Build. 2-part epoxy, so red and green bottle. I use a red and then a blue syringe, so I know which one's which. You do not want to mix these syringes. Always use them on the same bottle. If you use it on the wrong bottle, just throw them away and get a new set. We pre-measured out 3 milliliters of each. All we're going to do is pour them down in the cup. And then I will take my paintbrush, back side of the paintbrush, and I will slowly mix it just like this. And you don't want to overstir it or introduce air bubbles or anything like that, but you want to go hit it from all angles and everything like that. We'll do this for about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and go ahead and apply it to the rod. Okay, so now that we have our epoxy mixed up, you can see there's not a lot of air bubbles. When you mix it, it'll turn hazy, and then it'll turn back to clear, and that's when you're ready to go. We're going to go ahead and put some finish on here. All we will do is apply a light layer, and then we'll stop it and get the under wrap underneath so that doesn't come undone. And then we'll turn it back on, and it'll self-level itself because this stuff is self-leveling epoxy. So we'll go ahead, you just dip a little bit on your paintbrush and let the rod dryer do the work. So you just lay it on the rod and let it spin around there. Nice part is I'm using nylon thread for that green, so you can see where I've applied epoxy because it'll start to change colors. And it'll get darker. So I'll go ahead and keep applying epoxy. Now that we got all the finish tucked up underneath the guide foot there, you can see it meets where the guide foot is, and it'll create a nice strong bond to keep your guide on there forever. Alright guys, so we just finished up putting epoxy on all the guides here. We have to let it rotate for 24 hours, and then it'll be fully cured and it'll be ready to go fishing. I like to put a second coat on afterwards, but you don't need it. You can do second, third coats. You can do as many as you want. The more you put on, the longer your guides are going to last. I put a thin coat on, then I'll put a thicker coat on after for the second one, and it'll really lock that guide on there tight. So we're going to let this spin for 24 hours. I'll throw another coat on, but I'm not going to walk you through the whole process again. And then that thing will be ready to go fishing. If you want to see this rod in action, hit that subscribe button down below. I will be putting a video out coming up in the near future fishing with this rod that we just designed and built ourselves specifically for steelhead fishing, and I will even be giving away a kit to build your own fly rod. So if you're interested in that, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss that video, and you can see how you can win yourself a free fly rod. Thanks for watching.